Welcome into the WJHL Plus Digital Center. I'm Murray Lee, joined by two of my very good colleagues, Ansley Daniel and Jeff Keeling. Welcome in, guys.
Hello.
Thanks, man.
Well, thank y'all for joining us today. We're going to be talking, I'm going to really not be doing much talking. I'm going to leave that to you guys. But we're going to be discussing something that's drawn a lot of attention locally here in the Tri-Cities, specifically in Washington County and the Jonesboro area, involving the proposed rezoning by BWX Technologies, BWXT, typically as we referred to them. So I'm going to, Jeff, let you start things off, kind of give some background information, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Murray. Yeah, I mean, there may be people that are going to tune into this and haven't really heard anything about this, so I'll give some background that a lot of people are already going to know. But that is, in early November, there was a rezoning request with the Washington County Planning Commission, and that was by BWXT for a facility that's traditionally been known as Aerojet. It's about 2 miles west of David Crockett High School, west of Jonesboro, and for 50-odd years, they've been producing depleted uranium and at some point in time also high purity depleted uranium, but not for quite some time. And they got about 30 acres that's zoned industrial, but they also own, and they just bought this from another company about a year ago. There's another 100 or so acres that's currently zoned agriculture. And they have gotten a $1.6 billion National Nuclear Security Administration contract to produce high purity depleted uranium for the federal government over a period of 10 years. And by the way, it's one that they think and hope that is going to be kind of an ongoing thing. And so that's going to require building a new facility. And they want to do that on the land that is currently zoned A1. And they have their reasons that they say that's better than putting it on the land they have. That's all adjacent to each other anyway. So they have to go to the Planning Commission and ultimately the County Commission to request and either have approved or not approved rezoning that A1 to M2, which is heavy industrial. And when that came up for that meeting, that's in an area where there's not a lot of industrial, lots of families live around there. It's residential and agricultural primarily. So there was really a quick standing up of opposition. There were probably 100 plus, well, maybe 100 people at that very first Planning Commission meeting on November the 4th, at which the Planning Commission's like, this is too many people for us to really make a decision on this now. We're going to put it off. And so they put it off, and in the intervening 2 months plus, there's been a standing up of and a lot of organization of an opposition group called Neighbors of BWXT. And the company has tried to provide more information about its project. And there's been a zoning planning commission meeting early this month in which the planning commission actually voted 4-2 to recommend denial of this rezoning for this property. And we've got a map that you can pull up that shows where they intend to build, if you got that handy. So if you'll pause that, that lower. So the upper section is property that they already operate on, and it's near State Route 34 there at the very top. And then if you look at the bottom, there's white outlined what looks like could be buildings at the very bottom, kind of bottom center. To the right is some solar panels, actually. So, and then Little Limestone Creek is the dark blue line that flows through there. And there is a light blue, kind of blue-green line that represents the floodplain. So outside of that floodplain is a footprint, a ghost footprint of where they want to build the buildings that would include, they say, 175 new jobs and this production that would begin around, I think, early 2028 at that full-scale operation. Now, if you look back at their existing buildings, kind of at the bottom, so sort of bottom left, you can actually see another white footprint there of a square and then a little kind of curved rectangular building off this to the right of that. That is a facility that they are currently constructing that is a pilot plant for this high purity depleted uranium. So they've already gotten their environmentals and all their approvals for this pilot plant to show how they can scale this up for the federal government. So that is kind of the quick and dirty, bringing y'all up to speed on that. And Ansley, you know, we we've been getting some information and commentary from both sides of this issue.
Yeah, we've heard from both sides at this point. Really, starting back, like you said, in November, started hearing from citizens. And then this past Friday, we had Mr. Daly on first at 4. And it kind of gave him a little bit more breathing room, for lack of a better word, to explain some of the answers to a lot of questions that folks have. It gave an opportunity for him to be pretty open for a dialogue with me back and forth a little bit almost. And obviously this conversation is far from over, but it was, I think, an opportunity for him to kind of explain where the company's coming from, what they're currently doing and what the plan is going forward, and addressing a lot of these community concerns that have been brought up over the last couple of months.
That's right. And in addition to that, as we have had periodic interviews with the folks from neighbors of BWXT, the company they had a poster session in December that was not particularly well received by a lot of members of that group, but in which they were trying to provide some information about what they do and what they plan to do. And then because the neighbors had produced a 6-page list of questions that they sent to the company actually in turn produced a 51-page response answering those questions. That's all up on a new web page that the company has stood up. So this is really a kind of rapidly evolving situation in terms of information being put out and it moving towards some kind of resolution with respect to the rezoning request. They were going to ask the county commission to consider it in January, which would have been next Monday. Because they put that information out this week and expect there to be follow-up questions to that and maybe even more information put out by BWXT, they have moved that request back to the February, I believe it's going to be the 25th meeting of the Washington County Commission. Now, one of the things that I've looked up and that is because of that pilot plant, they had to get a NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act study done, pretty comprehensive, 100 pages plus, just for the pilot plant. And then they had to get Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation permitting for that. And that's particularly for the particulate and the emissions that are going to be going into the air from that facility. And so I asked him a little bit about that and whether there's any merit to the questions that these citizens have been asking. You can play clip 1 and see what he said.
Having concern about the particulates, where they go, absolutely reasonable. Understanding that the designs we use with HEPA filters to extract that from any process air that may be emitted is important. To understand those designs is important. And to understand that we take that very seriously. But not only us, the state of Tennessee takes it very seriously. And so you've got some oversight regulations that restrict how much particulate you can put in the air. And then you've got a good group of folks in Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation who their jobs is to ensure that we're following the permit that we have there.
Yeah, and so obviously he wants to answer as many questions as he can. I think that 51-page document has a lot of, information and answers, but I think that this is a way for some folks to be able to digest it. And speaking of folks that have questions, we have been talking with neighbors of BWXT, that group. There's a Facebook group. There is there's a billboard up. There might even be multiple billboards up now. And so we've talked to these groups about what their concerns are. We've also heard them speak at some of these county meetings. They've voiced those concerns to the county leaders in Washington County. So we've been talking with them and listening to what they are concerned about when it comes to this plant and the expansion of it.
Yeah, and I think that, not only has their involvement had an impact on BWXT and maybe to some extent its approach to this process and their efforts to get this rezoning, it's clearly had an impact with county leaders who are the decision makers in terms of this rezoning. I interviewed Mayor Joe Grandy probably in early-ish or mid-November about this whole thing, and at that point in time, he was, very complimentary of the prospects. I mean, it is a job creator, but he was talking about, his lack of concern really at this point about what this process was going to be, and hey, it's pretty much what they're doing out there already. Turns out, and as we'll get into this later, it's not exactly what they're doing out there already. But Mayor Grandy ended up coming out the day before the Planning Commission meeting and saying, I think that we need to tap the brakes on this until we get more questions answered. And then by a 4-2 margin, those planning commissioners did in fact say, we're not ready to recommend this to the full commission. And so I asked Ron Daly on Friday, and it was a much more deep dive interview. We got to spend about 40 minutes talking. I asked him whether the company had run into similar concerns at any other locations. BWXT is a huge company. They own NFS in Irwin, which makes more highly enriched uranium anyway for the National Nuclear Submarine Fleet. They're involved in the nuclear space in a lot of levels, in commercial reactors, small modular reactors. That is a thing that's kind of coming up now as nuclear power kind of enjoys a resurgence to some extent, and even like nuclear medicine. So I asked him about whether they'd run into any other communities where people kind of start to get up in arms a little bit, and here's what he had to say about that.
A recent one is with small modular reactor work in Wyoming, and so we are familiar with some of the concerns. If you look at what we're attempting to do here between the public information meetings, the 51-page document we put out, and we are trying to hit it with facts and trying to make sure that those questions get answered as quickly as we can and comprehensively as we can.
And we've talked a lot about health and safety throughout this, but at this point, the core of the issue is a zoning issue. What exactly did he have to say about that part of all of this?
Yeah, that is true. And we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but you've got these environmental concerns, which nobody denies are valid and natural for people to have, whether it's air, water, safety, whatever. But frankly, when it comes to this, now at this point, 58 or so acres that they want to have rezoned, it is really a land use issue. And so, one of the things that became apparent to me is that BWXT, to at least some extent, says, hey, this is kind of an obvious decision in their minds, and it is, does this fit with the objectives of Washington County's comprehensive plan, its land use plan, et cetera? And the answer from BWXT is, yes, we think that it does.
Where we have industry, it is in Washington County's favor to grow in the industrial space that you already have. And so if you look at where we are today and the extension of the zoning that we're trying to do and the fact that it is adjacent to the current M2 zoning that we have, it makes logical sense if you're going to expand to do so where you already have an industrial footprint.
We know that that is how BWXT feels, but those who live around that area, those who live in Jonesboro, maybe even not close to the area, and even people we've heard that have kids at David Crockett High School, not too far from where this site is, they see things totally different than what Mr. Daly is portraying this to us as.
They do, and that includes some research that they have done into the land use plan. So there is even really a difference of opinion over whether the land use plan and Washington County's general objectives about where industrial should site and where it should be expanded if there's a request there. There's a difference even there. So some of the folks from neighbors of BWXT are saying, yeah, you're saying that, and I will add that, and the opinion on the part of the neighbors of BWXT, at least the ones I've talked to, is that this is, they're suspect about this, but the county's zoning lead zoning staff person in the zoning office have essentially said, yes, this fits with the land use plan to do this rezoning. But I think what's one of the things that may be a little frustrating to BWXT is the claim, anyway, at least, is that their desire to rezone and move this where they want to move it is geared as much towards buffers for those neighbors and the good of those neighbors as it is anything else.
One of the things that we're highly concerned about in our design is making sure we are taking into account community concerns and what is best for the community. And so our opinion in this design is by going toward the back of our property, it provides more buffer on the front of the property for the community and puts it in a place to where it has less visual impact, less community impact. It also helps with the traffic in and out of the facility. And so there's very logical reasons that are strategic to benefiting the community as to why we're wanting to rezone this footprint.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at that footprint right now. We obviously know that there are some new buildings that are coming, but the biggest thing that we have heard from, or at least that I feel like I have heard from viewers and those that are concerned, is Little Limestone Creek flowing through this property. And as Jeff mentioned, that is the dark blue line here on this map. And as you can tell, it flows directly through this property that they own.
That's right. And the flood hazard, I don't know if it's the flood plain or the 500-year flood mark, but it's that, again, that kind of turquoise color that's running through there, which the planned road that would bring the materials back to the hoped-for new site is the broader white that goes kind of in and then rolls back out. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's right. And what's kind of interesting, honestly, Ansley, is that for years now, the depleted uranium that they are working with there and producing basically weaponry for the military, armor-piercing shells, anti-tank shells, things like that, because that depleted metal that's made from depleted uranium is super dense, super heavy, and they just like it for weaponry. You know, it works well. So that's what they're doing there. They actually are eliminating wastewater into Little Limestone Creek even now, like today. They have a wastewater permit, and Mr. Daly, you know, he addressed that in our interview.
There is a processed wastewater from the existing facility, and that will continue to operate. And so that water is batch treated and tested to make sure that it meets all the specifications before it is entered into Little Limestone Creek. That will be the remaining and existing discharge into Little Limestone Creek. So there is no nominal difference, no addition or any additional permitting for water into Little Limestone Creek.
So just to be clear with this, Jeff, there's already water from a depleted uranium process that's going into the creek right now. But if this project continues to go forward, is that still going to be the case? Could we see more? What is that going to look like?
Yeah, so this is where it gets, I mean, not super complicated, but so that permit is still in place. Mm-hmm. That plant that they already have is producing other stuff for the government, mainly for the military. That's that metal, and that's not going away. So that permit to discharge that water is still going to be in place. Now, that is not, according to the company, going to be required for the high purity depleted uranium. And he explained what is going to happen to the wastewater from that process.
It doesn't impact that existing permit. That is correct, because we're solidifying, taking all the waste. And it leads to the discussion to make clear, folks have suggested that we could bury waste on site. I just want to make sure it's clear. We have absolutely no intention to do that, no design to do that, no procedures to do that. And so everything's being shipped to a certified waste handler out of state, Texas, yep.
Okay, so it sounds like the topic of buried waste is relevant to this overall conversation, including to the work that's being done in Telford now and what was even done before. So are they just doing what they've been doing, just more of it?
No, it's kind of complicated. I mean, and that was kind of the narrative at first, not necessarily coming out of BWXT. I'm not sure. They might have been pushing that narrative themselves. It's not the case, okay? So they used to make, as did other entities, other companies in the United States, they made high purity depleted uranium. And around about the Gulf War, there began to be concerns about the impacts of high purity depleted uranium, the dust in the air and things like that. So what ended up happening is there was enough of a stockpile of leftover weapons and whatever that they were then able to transition to the stuff they do at Aerojet, where they make what they make now, this metal. They were able to do it by refurbishing leftover stuff that had high purity depleted uranium in it, and the whole country quit making it. Okay, and that happened for quite some time, but eventually they began to run out of that, and he explains how that brings us to today.
If you look at the more contemporary usage, it's different from the standpoint that most of the business for, let's say, the last few years has been mainly foundry work and machinery work. For many years, we were able to take surplus munitions, perhaps that had been in storage, recycle that depleted uranium, and make new munitions out of it. That works for a while, that works for years, but at some point you have depleted your stockpile. And that's where the nation finds itself right now. And so we need to replenish that stockpile of depleted uranium that's available for government uses.
So when it comes to Jonesboro, is this process totally new to that area?
I'm going to say yes with kind of a caveat because the production of high purity depleted uranium at that site did occur before. Aerojet was one of, sounds like several competitors that were making high purity depleted uranium at a time when they didn't have enough stockpiles and they had to be making it. So it's something they did before, but it's not going to be the same in a lot of ways, according to the company.
The work that we're doing to convert uranium compounds to uranium metal was done at the site previously.
So yes, it was. How they're doing it is very different. Their feedstock is going to be different. It's uranium oxides. That permit they've got for the air shows uranium hexafluoride, uranium trioxide, uranium dioxide. Before it was something called green salt. That was some other method.
So what exactly have you learned about the old method versus what we could see at this plant if it goes through?
Well, they didn't solidify the liquid waste and ship it off back then like he said they're going to do now. And frankly, what they were doing with the liquid waste really wasn't ideal.
They had evaporation ponds. It had its issues, yes, absolutely. And there's documentation on how that was remediated in Jonesboro as well. They go through a process to pull out the dirt, any solids waste that's in that area, treat it as solid waste, ship it off site, come back with a clay bed liner to put in that area, and then to reserve it in technically what's called an internment cell, but with it fully remediated from that standpoint.
So that history that he just brought up there that he's aware of is some of what the neighbors in that area are concerned about, right?
Definitely. Totally understandable. And so I asked Ron Daly, because we have this opportunity, really this responsibility as the media to do this. I asked him what kind of assurance he could give that somehow this is going to be different from a past when HPDU production, whether there or other places, did have some significant negative environmental outcomes. We've got Superfund sites associated with it. He said even when it was produced there in Jonesboro, quote, we don't have a history of major accidents. BWXT just spotted a year ago, so I think we is not exactly the right pronoun, but that's something else. But he said that there are two major differences now. Here's one of them.
Different regulations on how the process was run, how waste was managed. It was all done according to current regulations at that time, but they're significantly different today. In addition to that, a lot of the instrumentation, a lot of the state-of-the-art design is significantly different, improved, more efficient, and safer today than it was in decades past.
So that's all external. What we have to count on is what the government agencies are supposed to do, but what else did he say is different?
Yeah, and I have heard from some of the folks with the neighbors group, like they don't necessarily trust the agencies.
Yeah.
What can you do about that? That's an opinion, and whether it's got some basis in reality or not, sometimes there's been reasons for people to wonder. But he talked about what he called process safety management, and he also said there's lots of water and air monitoring internally that they do.
It's a set of rules and guidelines that any of us that deal with chemicals have to follow, and it is a very robust way of design, accident scenario analysis to make sure that you've got levels and layers of protection to ensure that no major incident happens. We have our own internal environmental monitoring, so we do emissions checks, we do water testing, air testing, we do independent testing. Okay, so it's third party to ensure that the results we're getting are good, the samples we are taking are quality samples. In addition to that, we have the state regulators that come in either with surprise inspections or blind sampling that they do of the same streams that we check, the same air that we check. They come in and do it unannounced and verify that our results are good results.
So we've talked to him. He's put out the 51-page document. They've had their poster session. He's answered a lot of these questions, but none of what's been brought up has seemed to change the opinions of the neighbors so far. Did you talk about that with Mr. Daly?
Well, I mean, one of the things I did ask him is whether the level of opposition has surprised him, and this is what he said.
It surprised us, I think, from how quickly it stood up. And so what I'm not surprised about is neighbors have good questions. That is no surprise at all. There are other linkages with social media to larger groups, larger organizations that were a bit surprising, yeah. So what we'd like to do is really focus on the folks who are there. They're local. They have true concerns that we can address with them, and we'd like to get those addressed, get them out on the table, answer the questions. If they've got concerns coming out of the questions, make sure we get those addressed.
So I want to touch on the fact that he mentioned outside groups there. What is your take on all of that?
All right, I mean, I'm going to give you my take. This is a nationally significant project to make something out of uranium, albeit depleted uranium, which does have a much lower radioactive content than even somewhat the natural uranium, certainly than enriched uranium. But it hasn't been made in a long time. And when it was made, it hasn't been made from scratch in a long time. And when it was, there were some problems. So I don't think the presence of outside groups being concerned should surprise them at all. I also asked him about the local leadership of neighbors BWXT, particularly Gabriel Wilson. We've met him, who's kind of their de facto front person. And this is what he had to say about that.
One thing I would do is just give kudos to Gabriel, how he's handled himself, the communications, his professionalism. So I think we have a very constructive dialogue there to focus on what are the true issues to the community.
So in the studio, Ron Daly spoke with me after this interview with you, and he laid it out. He basically said that BWXT plans to do this project at this Telford property with or without rezoning. But did he talk to you any more about that and what that could look like if this does not get passed?
I mean, he did somewhat, and you can pull that map up so we can also still take a look at that. He talked about it in two main ways. One, he expressed some frustration, really, I feel like, over the whole zoning conversation, because he said the environmental side of the question really isn't even supposed to be part of what county commissioners consider when they vote. There will be a completely separate process for what's called a NEPA review before BWXT can start operating that full-scale plant. Now, they've also said if they have to, they will squeeze it onto the two spots there in the red that is the current M2 zoning. But he did talk about why all the environmentals that they're going to have to go through before that even gets approved, that part in the back if they get it.
We still have the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, assessment to go through. All of that focuses on environmental and making sure that what we're saying is correct, number one, but two, that there is no impact to the community. And so there's yet another process to go through. And just to frame that, the commissioners, what they have in front of them, what they are charged to do right now is land use. Does it make sense in the comprehensive plan to extend the M2 industrial zone that is already there?
So planning commissioners did vote against recommending this, but it doesn't sound like it's a straightforward path to what's going on.
I mean, I don't think it is, and I think it's impossible not to conflate the land use with the environmental to some extent. And I think that's one of the reasons that they are trying to answer those questions anyway. I think there also are some legitimate interpretations of the land use plan that could lead to a conclusion that rezoning isn't correct. There's no sewer there. The land use plan calls for sewer with industrial. The area really doesn't have any other industrial around it right now. It's been developing largely rural and residential for decades. The road's not real wide. Of course, they want to build that new road around the back if they get that. But, neighbors of BWXT has been raising these issues, and I think they are at least worth talking about. They don't agree about that, but, again, he says the company's going to continue trying to share information on the environmental side.
A lot of the questions that are being asked are either similar or very close to the NEPA set of questions that we will be answering. And so they're good questions. They are honestly good questions. They need to be answered. And so just getting them out earlier to have that conversation is not a problem for us.
So he looks like he was about to say, but there. What does that mean exactly?
He was about to say but. And again, the but for him is just, gosh darn it, this particular thing that we're sending to the county right now is really supposed to be about land use. And I think there's some frustration. I also think they feel like they're doing their best to answer community questions and address community concerns. So, they probably wondered what the initial hubbub was, since they're already working with depleted uranium out there and there weren't people picketing their facility before that. And they've got a water discharge permit for that facility, and they're not even going to have one for this one. And so, he clearly thinks the company is a good operator environmentally and safety-wise. And, that's up to interpretation. I can't answer that question. I don't have any proof one way or the other. I know that the NFS in Irwin doesn't have some track record of violation after violation. But this has become a big deal. It's become a major concern to neighbors, and I can't say that I really expect necessarily a meeting of the minds, but it does sound like BWXT is going to keep trying.
I think there is good conversation we can have in that space to provide some assurance that we're operating as safely as we can. Any impact that they have is either none to minimal. The more conversation we have, the more we can help them understand exactly what is happening, how we're taking care of things, and so I think there's space there. I do think there are factions that there is no answer that will allay the conversation. It won't allay their fears, it won't allay their concerns. So we're focusing on the community, we're focusing on the neighbors and making sure we're answering those questions as best we can.
So what else stood out to you in this conversation?
Well, it was a really interesting conversation. It was a long conversation. We did talk a good bit more about air emissions and that. But I also know that, some people differ emphatically about whether the production of weapons is commendable. And that's really all the Jonesboro facility does and will do. One other interesting part of the conversation was that, there's a bit in the NNSA press release about this contract being let out that it's for the nation's nuclear arsenal. And I asked him about that. I'm like, okay, so I know some of this new stock that you guys are going to be producing is going to just go right next door for your stuff. But is some of it's going to, for the nuclear arsenal, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, so I asked him to talk a little bit more about it. And he's just like, that's not my place. You can ask the NNSA, which I assume the NNSA is not going to answer a lot of questions about, are we going to build new nukes? Is this just to, to refurbish the ones we've got? What I can say is that, and this is interesting to me, whatever that depleted uranium metal is used in nuclear weapons, it's not the stuff that makes them go boom. It's not the fissile material. It's just because it's such hard, dense metal. It's probably really useful for their tampers and some of the other components of nuclear weapons because it's such a heavy metal. I don't know why. Maybe uranium likes uranium. I don't know. So anyway, that was all. That part was interesting just because he shut up pretty quick about that. So, I was sort of like, I could tell you, but I might have to kill you kind of thing. Yeah. Really interesting conversation. And, I will say, though, again, back to the whole thing about weapons and national security, patriotism, whatever you might want to call it. Joe Grandy talked about that in the first interview I had with him. He did say that there's another factor that drives the people at this company, along with what he says is this commitment to safety and the environment.
Our ability as a nation to defend ourselves in the manner that we are, with the performance levels that we are able to defend ourselves and our allies, starts with technology that is in Jonesboro. There is a weight associated with doing it correctly, doing it environmentally, keeping the community safe. There is a completely different weight that comes with the importance of keeping this nation defended and how much of it comes out of Jonesboro.
I didn't get any sense that wasn't sincere. And, like Ron Daly told you on Friday, they plan to build this new plant and be producing, around 300 metric tons of new high purity depleted uranium starting in around 2030, I think, as far as full scale production. And then he told me, yes, it's a 10-year contract, but when I was like, okay, does that mean, these jobs are going to go away once you finish that out. He's like, no, I mean, the expectation is that they will want us to produce, an ongoing amount that will meet the needs of the United States of America. And he doesn't seem to see in the future that scenario changing. So pretty interesting.
Yeah, and obviously this conversation is far from over. I saw there was a lot of conversation about our interview Friday over the weekend. We all got some emails, we got some comments, and of course, for everybody that's watching, we are taking all of that into consideration with our coverage. We have multiple teams working on this. Obviously, some of those meetings are night side. Jeff and I have different roles here at Channel 11, and we've got some dayside reporters. So it is a team effort to bring this story to you all. So we're all working from every angle. And again, this is not the end of this conversation. And I feel like, even beyond the decision, we're going to continue talking about this plant and what is happening there.
I think so. And, it has been a very interesting story to work on. And I think both of the parties that currently don't have the same opinion about what needs to happen have been very committed. I think that the neighbors who were just minding their own business when they learned this, have made some very sincere and I think in large part well-meaning efforts and done some significant research to try to, get their minds around what this is all about and what it might mean. It's the age of the internet and social media, so on any side of an issue and in any issue, there's going to be a lot of noise and a lot of claims made that when we're doing our job as traditional journalists, we have to look at those and say, okay, that's a claim, but until we can verify it, we're not necessarily going to just, spread it ourselves. So, I think sometimes when I get when people on both sides of an issue levy some criticisms at us, that's generally a sign to me that we're probably doing our job decently well.
Yes, that every time, doesn't matter if it's this, if it's politics, anything else. Like you said, if both sides are coming at you, that means that we have typically done what we're supposed to do.
All right. Well, thank you guys both for the reminder on that front. It's always, hey, if no one's happy, then you're doing it right, I guess.
Yeah. Hard one to take in, though.
Well, thank you guys both for joining us, for helping us put together this production and talking really in depth about an issue that's got a lot of people very tuned in, very keyed into matters over in Jonesboro. And again, thank you both to coming in and actually spend your time here. We will continue, like Ansley said, to cover this story on WJHL.com, WJHL Plus, and all of our other outlets. So stick with us on the matter, and we will join you all next time. Yeah, Jeff?
Yep, we've got 15 county commissioners that, we talk about, people complaining, but there's 15 county commissioners who are going to hold this rezoning in their hands. So although it sounds like this project, at least to hear BWXT say it, will go forward regardless, that's still a very, he talked about the heavy weight of responsibility of the country's defense. It's fairly heavy weight on those county commissioners coming up.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you guys all for joining us. We will see y'all next time. Have a good night.